Well, welcome everybody. My name is Alexander Kent. I'm the executive director here. This is our Science on Screen series. It's a brand new series at the Robinson Film Center that we kicked off about a month and a half ago. And we have 3 more coming up. We'll get to this one in a moment, but this weekend we have a sold-out one, unfortunately. Big Hero 6 for kids. They're going to do the science of robotics, which is a lot of fun. But towards you'll see it, I can't remember the date, I think it's the 26th. 28th. We have Antarctica, a year on ice, and really fun. We have Charles Kirkland. He's a medic who teaches survival in extreme conditions like Antarctica. And he's going to come at the end of the month and explain basically how to survive extremely cold air conditioning. So that's going to be great. One of the reasons why I love this series is that the basic idea of this, and we really want you guys to get into it, is to illuminate the screen through the lens of science. We're taking science, we're not apologizing about taking big ideas and explaining them to an audience. You get to see them so often in popular movies, the physics of superheroes, the science of pain tolerance of people who are in fights. But a lot of these things are never explained. What this series tries to do is we take an expert from the community to come up front and tell you what's going on scientifically, and hopefully showing you some things or teaching you about some things that you might be curious about. So I'm a curious mind. I love series like this, and I really hope that we have just great support going forward. We're thrilled to have you here. We also have, it's very important, NAMI tonight is partnering with us, and it's just really a wonderful thing to be able to work with an organization that ties us into an audience and gives the screening a lot more meaning for our community. So before we introduce our speaker, I'm going to introduce Dennis Wisman.
Thank you. We are honored. We're very honored to be co-sponsor our Northwest Chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness on Mental Illness. We are a national group of advocacy for mental illness. Our biggest mission is to reduce the stigma of mental illness. So we're very proud. We're a very young chapter in the Shreveport area. And as you leave the theater this evening, we have cups and flyers and information on various mental illnesses that we'd love you to have pick up. But more importantly, we have a walk for mental illness on Saturday. If you're interested, down at the Stone Dirt Book Launch, there's some flyers up to the grab. And so you can learn more about our chapter then. Before I introduce our moderator, I am privileged to introduce our executive director of the statewide government, Nicole McGee. Raise your hand. And General Matt Reed is joining us this evening. She runs the state organization, and we're happy to have her here. My real privilege and honor, this man is one of the smartest people I know. I've known him briefly the last couple of years working together on some committees at LSU Health, but Dr. Pinkston is a clinical neuropsychologist. He's also, his specialty is in clinical psychology and medical psychology. He is an associate professor in the Department of Neurology at LSU Health. So we are pleased to have him there, so let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Can I hold this up far enough? Closer? You sure? Thank you, Dr. Wissing. I don't know about smart, he needs to get out more, but I'd like to thank him and NAMI for inviting me here, and then also Alex and Megan from the Robinson Film Center for allowing me to be here this evening. One other person who I think is very important, and that is Mike. I don't know Mike's last name.
Woodfork.
There you go. Winford?
Woodfork.
Woodfork. But Mike's the reason what you see in front of you looks great. It looked pretty good on my computer monitor, but he took it together and made it look fantastic. As Dr. Wissing, as Dennis said, I'm a neuropsychologist. I've been introduced as a psychoneurologist. I know some of those. That's not me. You can determine yourselves, I guess. All right, so we're going to talk today about a little bit about science, a little bit about fiction, and hopefully a lot of fun. Before we start, though, I want you to remember that human behavior falls on a continuum. So you will see symptoms and manifestations, and like a first-year medical student, you might think, oh, I do that. Well, you do, but the issue is continuum and severity. True mental illness is disabling. It causes impairment and loss. We all have some of these symptoms some of the time. You might have a lot of them to a lesser degree. That's okay. Miss Megan's going to help me. Is that better? No.
That one's fine. The other one's fine. Yeah, that one's good.
Turn it up just a little bit.
Is that better? Okay, just don't ask me to juggle them. The next slide. There are roughly 320 million people in the United States, a little over 321 right now. 1 in 5, or about 44 million, suffer from mental illness. 1 in 5. Roughly 1 in 25, or about 10 million, of the population of the United States suffers from serious mental illness of a disabling type. Despite our heightened state of significant awareness and enlightenment, stigmatization for mental illness is rampant, certainly across the world, but still within the United States, and we're going to see some of that in the presentation today. One of the most common types of mental illness is depression. We hear a lot about this. Now, clinical depression is different from sadness or bereavement. It means that you have a down or depressed mood nearly all the time, or a loss of interest in things that brought you pleasure before. And along with that, for more than 2 weeks, you will suffer from 3 of the following, which include a significant weight loss or weight gain, or decreased or increased in appetite, not because you're trying to lose weight. Insomnia or hypersomnia, psychomotor retardation or agitation, fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, diminished concentration or problems with indecision, and thoughts of death or suicide. It's a serious condition. Thank you. We tried to come up with a safe word for turning the slides, but I wasn't able to come up with it. She's trying. All right, 2.6% of U.S. adults suffer from bipolar disorder, or what has been called manic depressive disorder in the past. That's over 8 million people. 83% of those cases are severe, the vast majority, and that's 7 million people. So of the current population, 320 plus million, roughly 13 million of those individuals have or will experience major bipolar disorder in the course of their life, and over 10 million of those of a severe nature. Now, the difference between bipolar and just simple depression is episodes of mania. Now, mania is characterized by abnormally persistent, elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, an increase in goal-directed activity or energy lasting for at least a week. Now remember, this is at a pathologic nature. This isn't just extra energy or feeling great. If it ends up being hospitalized, it can be for any duration, just a couple of days. Now that increase in mood, energy, is accompanied by 3 of the following, including inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, maybe more talkative than usual, or manifest pressured speech, highly distractible, increased goal-directed activity or psychomotor agitation, and an increased involvement in activities that are highly have a high potential for painful or negative consequences. These people take risks. They engage in what you would call appetitive behaviors, meaning seeking after food or fun or sex, spending, driving too fast, those kinds of things. The burden of disability caused by mental illness can be measured in, call them dailies, because dally sounds rude, and that's disability adjusted life years. So what is the cost to me personally of a significant mental illness? On average, a significant mental illness can cost 13.6 years. Look at the top there, the dark orange bar. That's 13.6 years of significant disability or loss of time. Bipolar disorder can result in a loss of over 5 years. That's 62 months, 5.2 years, 270 weeks, or nearly 1,900 days. I had an exceptionally good day a few days ago, as happens once in a while. I don't mean to be melodramatic with you, but I would hate 2,000 days. Now, the total annual cost of mental illness is around $57.5 billion in 2006. That's billion with a B. That's a lot. I don't know how many junior bacon cheeseburgers that is, but it is a lot. If you look at it, that is enough to feed well, not just meagerly, 1.7 million adult males in the United States, or all of Sacramento for a year, or all of Warsaw for a year. That's a lot of people. Okay. Today we're going to talk about bipolar disorder largely. Now, for simplicity's sake, we're going to talk about bipolar 1 and not bipolar 2. That seems a little bit fussy, but for those of you that care. In a bipolar disorder, the individual exhibits states of both mania and depression, polar opposites, so hence the bipolar. The depression, however, is much more common. We won't see much of that in the movie today, but generally a person spends the bulk of their existence in a depressed state. The mania is a little more exciting. In mania, we see euphoria, aggression, irritation, increased physical activity, racing thoughts, reduced need for sleep, and increased reward-seeking behavior, like we mentioned before. Now, manic episode, generally people don't think that they need to seek treatment, and they may vehemently resist treatment, and they're notoriously non-compliant with their meds, and you'll see why in a minute. Manic individuals may change their dress, their makeup, their personal appearance to a more sexually suggestive or flamboyant style. Some perceive a sharper sense of smell, hearing, or vision, and they may manifest gambling or antisocial behaviors. But if you think about the increase in senses, those are kind of like superpowers. So you take an individual who has heightened senses. Initially, they feel fantastic. They feel very creative. They have a lot of thoughts. They got feelings of grandiosity, and you want to give them medication to take all that away. I don't know that I'd be interested either. Manic individuals, mood shift can happen very rapidly. They can go from anger to depression. Some individuals may become hostile or physically threatening to others, and when delusional, they may become aggressive or violent. Now, you can have catastrophic consequences from mania, such as hospitalization, legal problems, or financial difficulties. He comes home with 2 Mustangs because he couldn't pick between red and black. Often, these result from poor judgment, loss of insight, and hyperactivity. Did that with one hand. Okay, please. So the average age of onset for bipolar disorder, either the first episode of mania or significant depression, is about approximately 18 years of age. Now, as you can see, it can happen later in life as well. Generally, we think in the later teens, early 20s, when the responsibilities of life, the stress, and the pressures really start to hit most people. There's a 10-fold increased risk of heritability if your parents suffer from a mood disorder. Although the individual with bipolar disorder can return to full functioning between episodes of mania or depression, approximately 30% show persisting significant difficulties. Now, historically, the picture has been of a gradual stepwise decline, meaning that over time, with ineffective or no treatment, a person manifests significant manic episodes or depressive episodes, sometimes with psychosis, and they don't resolve entirely. So it can have a significant burden on them, as we talked about earlier. They perform worse on cognitive tests than unaffected persons. And these cognitive impairments can persist throughout their lifetime and cause them more problems in their decision-making and in their social interactions. The risk of suicide among individuals with bipolar disorder is 15 times the national average. And some estimate that roughly a quarter of all suicides are associated with people who have bipolar disorder. Okay, I've got some big words, so hold on for me. This is not a characterological flaw. These people can be jerks as well. But bipolar disorder is not a result of a history of long, poor decisions. There are biological mechanisms that have been found to be at play and that researchers are working on. Now, one of those is a disruption of the catecholinergic cholinergic balance. I did practice that a couple of times. An imbalance of this can result in switching from depression to mania. And if you'll follow me up above, your healthy person has extracellular acetylcholine that's regulated by an enzyme, acetylcholinesterase, that eats it up, and kept in balance with the other neurotransmitters, dopamine and norepinephrine. Those are the red guys. Catecholinergic, dopamine and norepinephrine disruption can be seen during manic episodes, and cholinergic, acetylcholine disruption, can be seen during depression. So an external stressor can enter the system, decrease the controlling effects of acetylcholine esterase, the enzyme that eats up acetylcholine, thereby increasing extracellular acetylcholine and causing dopamine and norepinephrine to decrease, resulting in depression. So we all know that stress can result in depression, but here's a fancy little teeter-totter that shows you how. Now, altering the catecholinergic homeostatic control can induce mania. What I mean by that is things such as sleep deprivation, a long activity of photoperiod lengths, meaning increased sunlight. And the scientists, you can't get published saying increased sunlight. You've got to say long activity photoperiod lengths. That can function to increase tyrosine hydroxylase, which is a precursor to dopamine and norepinephrine, thereby increasing the dopamine and norepinephrine levels, decreasing the acetylcholine levels, and inducing a manic episode. Now, the teeter-totter or the triangle underneath, your clock DAT, I didn't name that, is a genetic area that can modulate or determine susceptibility to differences in this regulating cycle. So what we've got is we've got neurotransmitters, we've got external forces, and we've got predetermined genetic code. Now, high resolution static neuroimaging, they're pretty pictures, and functional neuroimaging have revealed differences in the brains of individuals with bipolar disorder versus healthy persons. Specifically, you see lower brain connectivity between the areas on diffusion tensor imaging and functional MRI in the amygdala, the fornix, the cingulate gyrus, and the corpus callosum. Remembering that most of what the brain does is communicate within itself and inhibit function in other areas. That might seem counterintuitive, but it has to organize and tell its buddies what to do and what not to do. The areas that we're talking about here, the amygdala is primary for emotional control and reaction. The fornix is memory and emotion. The cingulate gyrus is drive and ambition. And the corpus callosum is an enormous bundle of fibers that goes between the two hemispheres and regulates information between the two. So it's not surprising to see deficits in these areas associated with mood dysregulation, emotional processing, and behavioral inhibition. Basically the same finding with some more lovely pictures. Reduced interhemispheric connectivity with blue badness has been demonstrated in the anterior prefrontal region of the brain. So the anterior prefrontal region is the get a second date center. I used to think of it as a get a first date center, but you can get a first date based on your looks or something else. But in order to get a second date, you've got to have socially appropriate behavior, you've got to have planning, you've got to inhibit certain responses. So, lessened connectivity in the prefrontal region of the brain coinciding with problems of emotional regulation and control. So the exact underlying mechanism is unknown, but the findings coincide nicely with the behavioral presentation of the disorder. But let's not let science get in the way too much, sorry. So the media has a long history of portraying mental illness with differing degrees of fidelity. You're familiar with a lot of these movies. Typically, people with mental illness are portrayed in a couple of different ways. Damaged, freaky, scary, dangerous, or just plain weird. Think of Cuckoo's Nest or Fatal Attraction. Would you want to share dinner with either of those characters? Sadly, though entertaining, this functions to perpetuate negative stereotypes and stigmas surrounding mental illness. Remember, 1 in 5. I've heard that if you treat everybody you meet as though they are having an entirely rotten day, you'll be right. 1 in 5. It's sad, but I mean, let's consider, right? Okay, so now let's move on to our movie. Our movie does a couple of things very nicely. It's one of the things I like about this film. There's a lot of psychopathology, but we're going to kind of focus on the bipolar disorder. Our protagonist, Pat, experiences pre-breakdown delusional paranoia. He talks about it a little bit. Followed by out-of-control aggressive behavior. Now, some people could argue what he saw, what he went through, could elicit that kind of behavior in just about anybody. But remember the paranoia and the delusional thinking that came before. Now, Tiffany's a little less straightforward, and we don't know that she has bipolar disorder or exactly what she has, but let's talk about her anyway. She shows impulsive, risk-taking behavior, this rampant sexual indiscretions, following the significant stress associated with her husband's death. She says she was depressed. Now, both show evidence for depression prior to the breakup, or their breakdown, I'm sorry, with Pat's significant weight gain and her significant decrease in sexual interest. Furthermore, as would be expected for bipolar disorder in at least Pat, there's a strong family history of apparent mood disorder, violent and volatile behavior, and his otherwise massively OCD father, who was highly functional for that. But anyway, there are behavioral difficulties that take an obvious toll on both families. They don't make a big deal out of it, but you look at Tiffany's parents as they're looking out the window. These poor people, they're having a difficult time with her behavior, and obviously Pat's family suffers. No one visited Pat for the entire 8 months he was hospitalized. And we addressed this a couple of times, and I think it nicely represents the stigmatism. His brother's like, whoa, I can't go in there. That's associated with mental illness. Pat even has difficulty accepting his own diagnosis, accepting himself, and he has to stigmatize Tiffany, indicating that, well, you're crazier than I am. Okay, so the stigmatism for mental illness. He's non-compliant with his medication. He shows a decreased need for sleep early on. Later on, you see him sleeping a little bit more. He shows some real changes in his thinking. Irrational behavior, concrete thinking, almost delusional, magical thinking. You'll see through his behavior, it's as if wishing hard enough can make something so. It's as if I work hard enough, even in otherwise unproductive ways, as long as I try really, really hard, I can make something happen. He's impulsive. He says exactly what comes to his mind right when it comes to his mind. And he and Tiffany both have a very difficult time inhibiting their responses and their mood swings. There's a couple things that our movie has a problem with, or that doesn't get quite right for your typical bipolar patient. Neither show a sustained depression during the bulk of the movie. As I mentioned earlier, if it is bipolar disorder, you could expect a manic episode for Pat, but it wouldn't last that long, and he would end up back in depression. Tiffany is less clear, but her behavior, although energetic, is very purposeful. She gets what she wants, and she gets it done, it's planned, it's organized, and it's effective. So this isn't Mania. Mania, it starts out interesting, but then it ends up destructive and chaotic. So Pat's mania is primarily delusional. He's got irrational efforts to win back his ex-wife. He's volatile and aggressive at times, but he doesn't destroy his situation. His behavior doesn't decline enough to cause him serious, serious problems. Now that might be because of his later supposed compliance with the medication, or perhaps his family's support, or maybe it's just necessary to keep the story going. At the end, they both show some rather well-developed insight, which is enjoyable but suspect given the situation. Now, could it happen? Well, I don't know, maybe. You've got two people with serious mental illness who seem to help each other out. What we do know is that men do better in couples. Women, it kind of depends on the guy. So even with mental illness, he could do better. They can function well if they're effectively treated and compliant, and if they have a reason to. I really enjoy the humanization of the characters. You think about his friend, the horrible stress and depression that he is suffering under. There's a lot of characters in here that are developed a little bit, but have their own stories. And frankly, there's enough harsh realism in life, and I really like a happy ending, so enjoy.
If you don't mind, we have time for 2 questions. Ooh. Who has any questions before? Yes?
I didn't really view the lady character as being seriously mentally ill.
At the present time.
Well, no, I mean, it's like you said, you know, the serious mental illness is more like seriously disabled. I mean, I see all kinds of people that are like that because they're just eccentric characters. I don't know that I'd argue she's not necessarily seriously mentally ill.
And I agree with you. I think it can be argued. There's a couple things that I looked at. She doesn't appear to be employed, and she's living behind her parents in the garage. Now, mind you, it's a nice garage. She used her settlement or insurance money to fix it up. There are suggestions that she had serious depression before with the relationship difficulties that she had with her husband, but that's not entirely spelled out. And she does manage to get what she wants done. She encourages, you could say manipulate, but I don't mind being manipulated if we both win. So she manages to get her goals met. So it's a fair enough question. Certainly if she suffers from mental illness, it wouldn't be as severe as it could be. So I agree with you. Yes?
You know, when somebody you know, has sex with people fairly indiscriminately, and you know the way they illustrate hers, it's pretty indiscriminate. You know, what do you look for there? I mean, you know, maybe it's not mental illness, maybe it's something else, but does it tell you anything right off the bat that, you know, anyone who's sleeping around that indiscriminately, does that tell you something about their background necessarily, or is it a, you know, could it be a lot of different things that would cause someone to do that?
You know, I'll tell you what I tell everybody from students to judges, and that is context is everything. If this is not a change for their normal behavior, if this is typical for their culture, then maybe not. If this is a significant change for their behavior or otherwise, then maybe so. But you'd have to put it in context to see. For her, I get the impression it wasn't consistent with her pre-morbid behavior, that it was a significant change for her. But it might not be, and even if it is a change, it could represent a host of different things. Certainly not exclusively bipolar disorder. They taught us a cool word in graduate school, pathognomonic. It's got a G in the middle. It took me a long time to learn how to say it because I choked on that G. But what that means is that it's a symptom of, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee the diagnosis of something. And then the real question would be, wouldn't it? Does it cause her significant loss, disability, or impairment, problems in her social functioning, occupational functioning, or otherwise?
Super.
Thank
Well,
you.
everybody, let's give the